Okay, so we're going to be in Luke chapter 14 this morning if you want to get there and put a thumb in it. We're going to be talking about speaking up in times where others around us are silent. And there are times where I think it's appropriate for us to be silent, right? Like there's times where it is just not appropriate for your 4-year-old son to make a noise like in the middle of a funeral, for instance. That would just not be okay. But there are times where it is expected to be loud. You're expected to make noise. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning, and we're going to look at a time where people were silent when they probably should not have been silent. And so let's look at this, and we're going to take this in chunks. We're going to cover quite a bit of ground this morning, but we're going to start in Luke 14, starting in verse 1, if you'll read this with me. One Sabbath, when he, meaning Jesus, when Jesus went to eat at the house of one of the leading Pharisees, they were watching him closely. There in front of him was a man whose body was swollen with fluid. In response, Jesus asked the law experts and the Pharisees, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they kept silent. He took the man, he healed him, and he sent him away. And to them he said, "Which of you whose son or ox falls into a well will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day?" To this they could not find an answer. So let's just stop there for a moment and let's look at what's beginning to take place here, the scene that is set. We have Jesus at a meal with a group of the Pharisees, the religious leaders. These are like the Jewish religious elite. And they're around this table, they're having a meal together. And it's noticed that there is a man here who has a condition that's made him kind of swollen. Back in the day, this was called dropsy. Now it's called edema. And it's really this condition where your body is not processing fluids correctly. And so instead of processing them, your body kind of retains them, and your extremities and other parts begin to kind of swell up because of the fluid that it's containing. And so we have this man that is kind of just there, and we don't exactly know why he's there. In my mind, there's two different options here. Option one is he was planted there by the Pharisees. This is on the Sabbath day. This is the day of rest, and there's much law that was written to say that you cannot work, you cannot really do much on the Sabbath day. It is truly a day for you to rest and not do anything. And so it could have been that the Pharisees planted this man at this table or in the area that Jesus was at in order to try and trick Jesus or to get him to heal this man so that they could, then trick him up and say that he healed a man on the Sabbath. So that's option one. Option two could be that this man just showed up. It was not uncommon for the sick, the broken, whatever, to be following Jesus around. And so it could have been that this man was just one of the many sick people that was following Jesus around, hoping that Jesus would heal him. Whatever the case may be, Jesus immediately sees this man that is in need of his help, and he heals him. And then he sends him on his way. Now let's look back at verse 3 here, because Jesus begins to point this conversation back at the Pharisees. Verse 3 here it says, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" This question is directly connected to the realization that there is a sick man in the presence of all of these people, and the religious leaders, the Pharisees, were doing nothing about it. Jesus is poking at them a little bit. He's prodding at them a little bit. And what he's really doing here is he's asking, what do you care more about? What do you care more about? Do you care more about your Sabbath day? Do you care more about the traditions or the laws? Or do you care about this man who is clearly in need of help? What do you care more about? And their response? Silence. You would hope that they would have more compassion for the individual that needs their help. You would hope that they would have compassion for this sick man who needs their help more than their traditions or their laws or their Sabbath. But here's the thing. As we strive to love like Jesus, as we've been talking about the last several weeks, as we strive to love like Jesus, we cannot have our holy days, our traditions, any of our rituals be more important than the people around us. None of these other things can be more important than the people around us. In fact, lost and hurting people should always be more important than a Sunday or a tradition or a practice or a ritual. They should always be more important to us than any of those things. And so Jesus does what he does. He heals this man. He sends him out on his way. And then he asks these guys another question. He says this, verse 5. Which of you whose son or ox falls into a well will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? Again, the law or the rule on the Sabbath day was you cannot do any work. And they had like limits, and you can only walk this far away from your house, and then it's considered work. And so this would have been considered work. If your son or your ox just happens to fall into a well, you reaching down and helping it out or working to get it out, that would be considered work. And so Jesus here again is kind of poking a little bit. Which is more important to you, the Sabbath day rule or your son that fell down into a well, or an ox of yours that fell down into a well? And really, again, what Jesus is getting at here is, do you love your son or your ox or your Sabbath day more than you love this man who was standing in your midst that clearly needed help? Response? Silence. What about you? What about us? What's more important to us? I hope you have been praying, as we've been talking the last several weeks. A couple times I've mentioned, be thinking about who's one individual in your life that you can be praying for and loving them like Jesus over the next year. I hope you have been doing that. If you have, put the image of that individual in your mind for a second. Think about that individual just for a second, and let's just be honest with ourselves. How great is your love for that person? How great is your love for that person? How far will you go so that that person can have a relationship with Jesus? And what do you love more than that person? I mean, we need to get real and we need to get honest with ourselves here, because how we act and what we prioritize and how we live our lives show what's most important in our lives and what we love. How we act, what we prioritize, how we live our lives shows what we prioritize and what we love in our lives the most. And some of us, if we're being honest, our hobbies, we love more than lost people. For some of us, our jobs, we love more than lost people. For some of us, our money or our future retirement or our games or our cars or our job advancements or our kids, we love so many things more than lost people around us. Some of us love our Sunday morning traditions more than we love lost people. Church, we cannot be silent here. In this moment, when we're talking about lost people and whether or not they're going to come to a relationship with Jesus, we cannot be silent here. We must care and love and reach more people than we ever have. And we must continue to do this. And so Jesus heals this man on the Sabbath day. He heals this man because his care for this man was more important than the rules and the regulations on the Sabbath day. And this really shows that God is really more concerned about compassion and healing the lost than he is about keeping the rules and traditions. God is really more concerned about compassion and healing the lost than he is about keeping the rules and the traditions. Let's continue on. Let's look at verse 7 through 14 here. Jesus then told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the best places for themselves. He said this, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, don't recline at the best place, because a more distinguished person than you may have been invited by your host. The one who invited both of you may come and say to you, 'Give up your place to this man,' and then in humiliation you will proceed to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and recline at the lowest place, so that when the one who invited you comes, he will say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' You will then be honored in the presence of all the other guests, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. He also said to the one who had invited you, who invited him, when you give a lunch or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, your rich neighbors, because they might invite you back and you would be repaid. On the contrary, when you host a banquet, invite those who are poor, maimed, lame, or blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Jesus tells a parable in response to really the pride that is surrounding him at this dinner banquet here, the prideful reality of the people around him. And this is really true for us as well. I mean, if we're being honest, and if I'm being honest, one of our greatest struggles, is it not pride? Is it not our own pride, our own desire to elevate ourselves, to make ourselves bigger than we are? Isn't this one of the major human conditions that we struggle with? We get invited, we are attracted to the best place, we're attracted to our favorite places, and we do what we can in order to get those places. We do what we can to get into the best seats. Or when we make plans, we're tempted to invite people so that they can come, they can receive from us, and then they can in turn invite us to what they're doing, and we can get repaid. We don't want to feel like we gave or served for nothing. And so we give and serve to those who can serve us back. But ultimately, Jesus is talking about our desire to have things that we want. We want our preferred places. We want our preferred parking spots, our preferred seats. We want attention from the important people. We want things our way. We want things the way that we like it, our way. We want to make things about us. And so it comes down to pride for us. Pride is a struggle every one of us has. We are prideful people. A Canadian preacher named Carey Nieuwhof, he wrote in a blog a while back about 5 habits of a prideful leader. And I want to share parts of this that he wrote with you all. And he's writing from the angle of leadership, but I believe this is applicable to all of us. And so when you hear leader or position, you can just substitute your specific situation in for all of those things. This is what he says: 5 habits of a prideful leader. Habit number 1, you feel entitled. A proud leader or Christian or individual, whatever you want to say about yourself, a proud leader feels they've earned their leadership or position or whatever it is. A proud leader feels they have earned their leadership position. You've secretly come to believe that you're the smartest people in the room. You've worked harder than everyone else. You wouldn't say it out loud, but you sometimes think you deserve the corner office and the public accolades. A humble leader doesn't feel that way at all. They know others are smarter and want them on their team. They realize that despite all the hard work they've put in, there are others who have worked just as hard or harder and haven't seen the same results. They don't feel entitled, they feel grateful. You feel entitled. Habit number 1. Habit number 2, you take the high place. Proud leaders enjoy titles, corner offices, and praise and perks that come with a position. In fact, at this point, you enjoy the reserved parking spaces as well as the recognition and any VIP status that comes your way. The humble take the low places. They adopt a posture of serving rather than being served. They are happy to help out and anxious to share what they have as a result of their leadership with others. They shake off titles and don't mind washing the dishes or sweeping the floor. To wash the dishes or sweep the floor 40 hours a week is likely not the best use of the leader's time, but an unwillingness to do it is a sign of pride. Nothing is, quote, below you when you adopt this stance. You take the high place. Habit number 3, you close your notebook. The smell of death is in the air as soon as a leader thinks he or she has arrived. A sure sign of this is when you begin believing you have nothing to learn from certain people. And this happens primarily 2 different ways. First, you stop learning from people you think are below you. People who haven't achieved as much or don't have as much status as you. Basically, you've come to believe you are better than they are and have concluded they have nothing to teach you. And the second way is this: because you're insecure, as most proud people are, You've also stopped learning from people you're envious of. These are people above you who you think you should be more like, but your insecurity has stopped you from learning from them. You can't learn from people you're jealous of. The humble keep their notebooks open. They believe they can learn something from everyone. They are not too proud to learn from people starting out, and because they are secure in what God has given them, they are never too envious not to learn from people above them. The fourth one is this. You like the spotlight. Prideful leaders are incredibly reluctant to share the spotlight. After all, you've worked so hard and long. Why share this moment with anyone? So if you're a proud leader, you want the stage as often as it's available. You want to chair everything and are reluctant to let anyone truly lead or get credit. But humble leaders willingly push others into the spotlight. They share credit. They share the stage. They don't have to lead everything. In fact, they intentionally develop other leaders and even replace themselves in many key roles because the mission is more important than they are. A humble leader actually rejoices in the success of others. A proud leader resents the success of others. And the fifth one is this. You address before you confess. Proud leaders love to point out the flaws in others, but rarely admit their own flaws. Clearly, it's easy to address shortcomings whenever you see them, but address your own, hey, that's between them and God. The humble are different. The humble confess their own sins before they address the sins of others. They remember that they became Christians because God is good, not because they are good. They readily admit their shortcomings before they point out areas that need to be addressed in others. Proud leaders, in many cases, have even stopped privately confessing their own personal sin to God. After all, they are pretty awesome. Get in the habit of privately and publicly admitting your sin, and when you address the shortcomings of others, you will do it with remarkable humility and grace. 5 habits of prideful leaders. I think we could say these are 5 habits of prideful people. Look at verse 11 again with me, if you will. In Luke 14, verse 11, it says this, "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted." If we're going to intentionally humble ourselves and exalt other people, there's a couple of things that we have to do. And the first one is this. We must choose to move ourselves to a lower place. We must choose to move ourselves to a lower place. This is a choice. Humility is a choice that we make every time we are given the choice of a place of preference or a place that is lower. Humility is a choice we make when we're given the option between a higher place or a lower place. Humility is a choice that we make when we are given the option between getting what we want and putting others' preferences and opinions above our own. Imagine you're at a wedding and you're sitting in the reception hall waiting for the wedding party to come in and take their place at the head table that is set aside for them. And then all of a sudden, as people are coming into the reception hall, people just start sitting down at the head table who aren't a part of the wedding party. This would be an outrage, right? This would be a horrible thing because that is reserved for them. Humility is the choice we make to sit in the back of the room, not at the head table. We sit at the back of the room where the servers are coming in and out of the kitchen and the door hits the back of your chair every time it's opened. We sit at the back of the room where the servers trip over the leg of your chair as they're going into the kitchen. You choose to lower yourself. We must choose to lower ourselves. And when we choose to lower ourselves, to put ourselves in a lower place, then the second thing can happen. We can choose to call others to a higher place. When we choose a lower place for ourselves, we can choose to call others to a higher place. And we're basically saying, you are higher than me. You are more important than me. Sometimes we have to call others to a higher place. Sometimes we have to give others around us preference so that they can see how important they are to Jesus. Sometimes we have to put others' needs and preferences ahead of ours so that they can see the love and Jesus prioritizing them as well. Jesus wants to heal a sick world. He wants to cure people who are sick and broken. He wants to help those who are helpless. He wants to provide salvation for those who are lost. But this becomes difficult when we constantly push our own preferences, when we constantly want the best things for ourselves. We need to lower ourselves so that we can call people to a higher place so that they can see that they are a priority to Jesus. Let's read on in Luke chapter 14. We're going to go back to verse 12 and then read on further in the chapter here. Verse 12 says this: Jesus also said to the one who had invited him, "When you give a lunch or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors, because they might invite you back and you would be repaid. On the contrary, when you host a banquet, invite those who are poor, maimed, lame, or blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." And then he continues on. When one of those who reclined at the table with him heard these things, he said to him, meaning Jesus, "The one who will eat bread in the kingdom of God is blessed." And Jesus told him, "A man was giving a large banquet and invited many. At the time of the banquet, he sent his slaves to tell those who were invited, 'Come, because everything is ready now.' But without exception, they all began to make excuses. The first one said to him, 'I just bought a field and I must go out and see it. I ask you to excuse me.' Another said, 'I just bought 5 yoke of oxen and I'm going to try them out. I ask you to excuse me.' Another said, 'I just got married and therefore I'm unable to come.' So the slave came back and reported these things to his master. Then in anger, the master of the house told his slave, 'Go out quickly into the streets and alleys of the city and bring in here the poor, the maimed, and the lame.' 'Master,' the slave said, 'what you have ordered has been done, and there is still room.' Then the master told the slave, 'Go out into the highways and the lanes and make them come in, and so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, not one of those men who were invited will enjoy my banquet.'" So the question really is here at this time that Jesus is talking, are you ready for the guests to come in? Are you ready for the guests to come in? Jesus is telling about a banquet, and much preparation has been done in order to put this banquet on. And then it's time for the banquet to take place, and so the master sends out his workers, and he says, "Go get those who have been invited and tell them it's ready. Come in here and celebrate with us." And so the worker goes out, and he begins talking to those invited, and they all make excuses for why they can't come. "Well, I just bought a field, I need to go see to it. I just bought some oxen, and I need to go break them in. I just got married, and so I can't come." And so the worker comes back to the master and reports this, and the master says, "Fine, if they don't want to come, then I will invite those who will come. Go out into the streets, go out into the alleys, go out into where the outcasts are, and invite those in here." And so they do that, and there's still room. And so the master says, "Go out even further. Go to the edges of the town and invite anybody who will come so that they can be a part of my banquet." There's a couple principles back in the first century that kind of drove who you would and would not eat a meal with. Eating a meal was kind of a significant thing, and so there were principles that drove who you would and would not eat a meal with. And the first one is this: like eats with like. Like eats with like, meaning you eat with people who are very similar to you. You don't eat with somebody who's totally different than you. You don't eat with somebody who is lower or higher than you. In this situation, like eats with like. The second principle is this: when you do eat with somebody who is different than you, you eat with somebody who you can benefit from, who you can gain something from. You eat with somebody who you can gain something from. What Jesus is suggesting here is that we should eat with those who we can gain nothing from. We should invite those in who can benefit us really none at all. We need to invite the poor and the lame and the blind. This would be unheard of at this time. And you can kind of imagine the Pharisees, as they're hearing this, are starting to get worked up. They're starting to get enraged about this. But look back at verse 12 through 14. Because this is the principle that Jesus is working off of here. Verse 12. He says, "When you give a lunch or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, your relatives, or your rich neighbors, because they might invite you back and you would be repaid. On the contrary, when you host a banquet, invite those who are poor, maimed, lame, or blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Are you willing to invite those who cannot pay you back? Are you willing to get involved in the lives of people that cannot benefit you at all? Are you willing to stop making excuses and do what Jesus has told us to do with whoever he's told us to do it with? Jesus doesn't want our excuses. He doesn't want us to make up reasons why we can't do these things. He wants our energies to go towards letting everyone know that they are invited to the banquet. Jesus wants us to do everything we can to let everyone know that they are invited to the banquet. And so Jesus sends us out into the city, into the streets, and invite everyone that we can to the banquet, to be with Jesus, to dine with Jesus, to hear about Jesus. There is no qualification on this. Jesus sends us out to anybody who will accept the invitation. And that very well may be people who are broken, who are hurting, who are sinful, who are outcasts, who are addicts, who can benefit us none. Jesus sends us out so that we here in this place can allow people to come in and we can give them preference over ourselves, and they can hear the message of Jesus and they can be loved like Jesus. Church, are we ready for the guests to come in? Are we ready for people who are not like us to come in? And are we ready to do everything we can to benefit them so that they can experience the love of Jesus in their life? Pray with me. Father, I'm thankful for your word, and thank you for this encounter that we get to read between Jesus and these Pharisees, and how we can read about preference and our own pride, and we can be convicted of this. And Father, I pray for each one of us that our eyes would not be set on what we can gain from others. I pray that our eyes would not be set on what we can get, on our preferences, on our opinions, but that we would be set on doing everything that we can to reach a lost world for you, to point people towards you, to love people like you love them. Father, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your love that you give us and that we can show to other people around us. Let us do that. Help us do that. Give us the strength and the courage to go out and love a world that is sometimes unlovable, but desperately needs you.